it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Good evening, brave listeners, and welcome to the edge of legend, where hope burns bright just before it's snuffed out. I'll be your guide tonight, leading you through a tale carved from awe, terror, and unanswered questions, a place where heroes rise higher than gods and fall into shadows no one dares to search. So turn your eyes from the windows, quiet the world around you, and lean in close. What you're about to hear begins with salvation promised and ends with silence, with a figure who could outrun destruction itself and chose not to. Or couldn't. When the sky tore open and humanity's faith was tested in fire, something went terribly wrong. This is not just a story about invasion or power. It's about absence, doubt, and the chilling possibility that our greatest protector may still be out there, watching. And if he returns, everything changes. I'm a superhuman who failed to save the world, by Mr. Mills 45. Part 1. I'm sure at some point in time you've read comic books, watched films, either live action, animated or otherwise, about superpowered saviors. You know, the big muscular men and women in tights who go around defending the planet from world-conquering warlords or eldritch abominations. Well, they're real. They're all real. At least in my dimension they are. I'm even one of them, and I'm pretty sure I'm also the last of them. In fact, I'm probably the last surviving member of the human race. But most would hardly consider me human after my, enhancements, shall I say. My name's Victor, but when they were still around, the public called me Rubble. It's a bit corny, I know, but I didn't necessarily pick it out. It just kind of picked up steam on social media after a particularly destructive fight I had with some creature that emerged from the underground to tear apart Manhattan. Well, I didn't look much different from your average guy. I was under 6 foot, short, black hair. Well, the experiments the feds did on me did increase my muscle mass a bit, but it wasn't like The Rock or Arnold Schwarzenegger by any means. The powers I was given were pretty standard, although I'd never tested the true limits of them. I had only a rough idea of what I was capable of. And the first of these powers was superhuman strength that had once allowed me to lift an entire US aircraft carrier. Don't know the weight off the top of my head, so I'll just go with a hell of a lot. But even after that, it still felt like I had plenty of strength to spare. Now the next was flight, because who doesn't want to soar across the clouds, am I right? Although you do end up swallowing quite a few bugs if you're not careful. Yeah, best to wear some goggles if you don't have the reaction time to evade them. And the third was superhuman speed and reflexes. You've got to be able to react and travel quickly. I thought the super hearing was great too, till I overheard several conversations that I didn't need or want to. It was more of a curse than a blessing at first, but eventually I learned how to tune most things out. There were still a few slip-ups here and there. I was supposedly given an increased lifespan as well. Not complete immortality or anything, but I currently sit at a little over 45 years old and don't look a day over 25. And finally, I was gifted with increased durability, which I also never had the limits of tested, but to get the basics out of the way, I was impervious to all conventional gunfire. I once survived the explosion of a skyscraper while inside it without so much as a scratch. It did send me flying though, so there is that. Now, my old director even said I should have tried to see if I could withstand a nuclear blast. And while the street cred of being able to say I took the full force of a Tsar bomber would be great, I didn't want to take the risk of being wrong and ended up vaporized. But despite how I make it sound, I'm not invincible by any means. I've bled and I've been almost overpowered by monsters, aliens, and other beings with similar abilities to myself. Once had a couple of teeth knocked out by some sort of Cthulhu-looking thing that rose from the depths of the ocean and tried to wipe out everything along the coastline. Well, I stopped it, but it ended up putting me in the hospital. A hospital specifically designed and built to heal and hold enhanced people. Regardless, those were the glory days, the times I took for granted. Oh, how I wish I could go back to them. Humanity was wiped out some months ago by a hostile alien species known as the Proctons. The cities and towns that used to hold and house thousands are now nothing more than charred graveyards and outposts for some of the Progtans. Now, from what I know, the extermination, as I call it, was worldwide, across the entire globe. They weakened every country's forces. I did my best. All of us enhanced people did, but it wasn't enough. The individual members of their species by themselves aren't very strong or powerful, but their technology was at least decades beyond anything here on Earth. And as a result, our fight against them was pretty one-sided. For starters, I mentioned possessing superhuman speed and reflexes, and sure, I could avoid a bullet or two here and there if I put the effort in. But lasers were a different story. They had a ton of them. And on top of that, some had advanced armor suits that endowed them with just enough strength to even stand a chance against me. Usually in a one-on-one, I was capable of overcoming that, but once they attacked in numbers, it was either retreat or die for me. There were the suits, the tanks, their aircrafts, hell. They even had sonic grenades, which doesn't exactly pair well with superhearing. Regardless, my surroundings told me that I was one of the only people left alive in the wake of the extermination. Sure, there was someone out there somewhere, but I've become a bit doubtful that even if I do find them, they'll survive long enough for it to be meaningful. And what I really want, more than anything, is to find the leader of that species of assholes and end him publicly, in front of all his hideous-looking errand boys. And I can kill the rest of them too, if I manage to get that far. One of my most notable encounters with them came when I'd just flown into what remained of downtown Manhattan. It was mostly what you'd expect. Crumbled buildings with all sorts of plant and weed growth sprouting out of the empty husks. Empty cars spread amongst the streets. Mostly empty anyway. Yeah, some still contained corpses within them. One had its driver door ajar with the decomposed corpse of a woman leaning halfway out, indicating that she was killed while attempting to flee from her vehicle. Well, at least she was in one piece. From the shape I've seen a lot of other bodies in, they weren't so lucky. A handful was severed in half at the waist after being shot by a laser. Some had their heads and skulls missing as a result of the sonic grenades obliterating their eardrums and brains. Even then, there was worse than that, much worse. But I don't need to list everything. Sure, you get the idea. Regardless, I kept cruising about 100 feet or so above the ground in Manhattan, looking down at the remnants of what was, when I suddenly heard the faint burst of a cannon. Before I could even pick a direction to look in, I was suddenly hit with the hot, explosive energy of a laser blast and was sent tumbling to the ground below. I fell at breakneck speed and at an odd angle, one that allowed me to go crashing through the side of a skyscraper and come out flying from the opposite end. My impact with the pavement left multiple small craters as I somersaulted backward numerous times before finally coming to a screeching and destructive halt. It hurt, sure, but I've taken blows far worse than that in the past. Put my hand on the cracked concrete to push myself up, but immediately stopped as I laid eyes on a somewhat grim sight sitting less than a foot from my face. It was a skull, human obviously. A chunk of the top right was missing though, and the jaws were agape as if it, well, whoever it belonged to was still trying to scream. 99% sure they died like that, screaming. I looked away from the unnerving sight and flew back up. While hovering a couple of feet above the pavement, I looked around for where that blast might have come from. Even trying to listen out for it, I kept low and didn't dare fly up any further. I didn't want to get myself shot right out of the sky again. But I was instead greeted with an intense, bassy shockwave of sound piercing its way into my eardrums. I cut my hands over my ears and fell to the ground, my knees sinking an inch into the pavement as I collided. God, it was like someone had shoved a large speaker inside my head before turning it up full blast. I snarled in pain while attempting to look around for the source of this horrendous noise. The sheer volume of it impaired my ability to pinpoint the location at first, but I soon noticed that one of the abandoned vehicles on the road was moving ever so slightly from side to side as if something was making it vibrate. It sat around 50 feet ahead of me. Without taking my hands off of my ears, I took flight and quickly closed the distance, gritting my teeth as I came to a hovering stop and peered inside the shattered passenger window of the car. Inside was a fist-sized spherical-shaped metallic object. 2 small vertical red lights flashed repeatedly on either side of it. I immediately recognized it as one of the Proctan's sonic grenades. Well, without waiting a second longer, I descended and then threw my right foot out and kicked the car up into the stratosphere. And soon enough, the grenade was out of range to maintain its effect on me. As to why I didn't choose a less flashy method to neutralize the threat, well, whatever the hell those grenades were made out of were tough. Definitely wasn't a metal present anywhere here on Earth. The last time I tried to simply crush one in my hands, it took the majority of my strength to do so. Just for perspective, bending and crushing steel for me was about as easy as destroying cardboard for a regular person. Basically, I just wanted to get the damn thing out of range as quickly as possible, without having to take my hands off my ears, that is. But now that it was gone, I could do just that. I immediately heard a pattern of metallic clanking coming from around the street corner. It was a sound I recognized. It was the clanking of the boots of the Proctons' armored suits. So instead of letting however many it was of them turn the corner and get the jump on me, I'd ambush them first. Without wasting a second, I quickly lunged and flew forward as fast as I could, and with ease I smashed through the walls of the first floor of the skyscraper that separated me from my adversaries. Dust kicked up and created a smoke-like aura as I crashed through the concrete and rebar like a speeding bullet. I grabbed the first Procton that I saw around the waist and maintained my flight speed for a slight bit longer before coming to a sudden and hard stop, which sent him crashing through the set of buildings across the street, while I stayed hovering in the center of the street. I knew it wouldn't be enough to kill him in that suit, but getting him away from the others bought me some time to gauge what this group's numbers were. I turned around while still hovering and caught a glimpse of 3 more. Yes, this would be a good time to mention that these guys were hideous. They stood tall on 3 long, leg-like appendages, which granted them an average height of around 6.5 feet. Through the transparent helmets of their suits were their faces, and I do mean faces plural, one on both the front and back of their heads, which their scarlet red skin was also stretched over like poorly molded Play-Doh. The features of each face on their heads consisted of 3 golf ball-sized eyes that glowed a bright pastel yellow. There was no nose to be seen, but a couple of inches below those horrendous eyes was a pair of thin, scaly lips that barely concealed their many jagged, black-colored, asphalt-like teeth. They were also completely hairless. The biggest of the 3 Proctons stepped forward in his armor. Through his helmet, I could see him maintain an expressionless frown, as if he was mildly disappointed at best and completely apathetic at worst. Why so much anger in the way you confront, human? Your kind had its chance. It shot at establishing a legacy in the grand game of existence, and it failed. You must learn to accept that the universe does not allow the weak to thrive, only the strong, he announced in a horribly scratchy voice, one that made me wish I'd listened to the nails on a chalkboard instead. Shut the fuck up, I growled before flying forward to tackle this monstrosity, only to be thrown to the side while en route by the impact of a laser blast. I slid down the street and tore up several yards of pavement before regaining myself and flying right back in their direction, now furious. I stopped mid-flight and threw a punch that I practically put my whole shoulder into right at the chest area of the larger Procton. I heard the blow heavily dent the metal of his suit before he was sent flying away like a fastball, crashing through several traffic lights and building walls in the process. The other 2 Proctons quickly turned and aimed their blasters at me. Just before they could fire them off, I swiftly descended and stomped my foot into the ground hard enough to crack the very asphalt we stood on, creating enough force to knock the both of them off balance and drop their weapons. I quickly knelt down and grabbed both blasters, but before I even got the chance to toss them away, both of the Proctons jumped on me. I jumped off the ground and began to fly up at a speed that I hoped would throw them both off immediately. They hung tight with a vice-like grip. In the midst of the chaos, I dropped both of the blasters, but I still had both of them to deal with. Whatever they made their suits out of was strong enough to keep me from easily tearing right through it. And, to add insult to injury, their blows when in those suits legitimately had some power behind them. Sure, they definitely weren't going to beat me to death, but there was enough force in each punch to make me wince. With both of them still on me, I couldn't even see where I was flying, which caused me to go crashing through what I thought was a floor of what used to be an office building. We tore through the floor, walls, ceiling, and various pieces of furniture, a continuous path of destruction that would have cost tens of thousands of dollars if anyone was still around to foot the bill. Once we emerged onto the other side, I purposely gave up my momentum and let the three of us go crashing into the ground. The chaos of the impact was enough to get the both of them off of me. They slid across and tore up the pavement after detaching from me. But even after all that, their armor only had some small scratches here and there. I hovered a few feet above the ground, prepared to fly full force into one of the now separated Proctons, but the third one, who I'd punched way earlier, suddenly emerged and leaped onto my back. With how distracted and preoccupied I was, it was no wonder I didn't even hear him. Well, I simply counterattacked by reaching back and grabbing the Procton by the neck, before then pulling him over my head and forcefully slamming him into the road below. The asphalt buckled on impact, and he became embedded a couple of inches within it. I then raised my right fist and brought it down onto the chest area of the armor with a forceful grunt. A dent formed in the shape of my knuckles and fingers where the blow connected, and the impact shook the ground around us. I then followed up with another few blows, each one more powerful than the last. As I continued to wail on him, I felt every bit of hatred, anger, and malice that I possessed for these things emerge. My desire to hold back even in the slightest had completely faded. Each punch sent an almost earthquake-like rumble through the pavement around us. The Procton could barely squirm before I punched him right through what little remained of the road and down into the sewer tunnel below. I fell with him, landing with my knees on his abdomen area. He looked up at me, and I could see that genuine fear emerged in his hideous eyes. "You come to my planet, kill my people, and you expect me to be rational?" I shouted with a furious snarl. "I'll kill every last one of you and rip you limb from fucking limb." I raised my fist and prepared to come down with another blow, one that I was hoping would be the one to finally break through the armor of this monstrosity. And likely, we would have. That was up until I felt a sudden and sharp wave of pain shoot up the length of my back. It's one of the few times I'd ever been stabbed since I'd gotten my powers, but the sensation was still familiar nonetheless. After I turned around and laid eyes on the Procton, who stood there fearful as he gripped a short, shiny silver blade in his armored appendage, blood dripped down and nearly reached the handle before the Procton lunged forward to take a second attempt on my life with his blade. But even with my injury, I was still fast enough to easily dodge the swing, then throw an uppercut powerful enough to knock him back up through the asphalt of the street above us, and hundreds of feet into the air above that. With all my might, I bent my knees, jumped, and then flew up with all the strength and momentum I could muster, ignoring the stinging sensation on my back and the warm blood dripping down my skin-tight outfit. The unfortunate Procton was still dozens of yards above the street as I collided with him, and that, combined with the durability of my flesh and skeleton, was enough to completely split the creature in half, or as close as you could get to it with the strange anatomy of these things. His dark, violet-colored blood soaked everything from the top of my head to my lower chest. It dripped from my hair as I stopped to hover not far above where the initial collision took place. The two halves of the Procton's armored corpse fell to the damaged road below. I looked down at his comrade, who still laid flat on his back in the sewer tunnel below the street. his suit heavily dented as he struggled to recover from our confrontation. The third Proctan seemingly disappeared, but I didn't have time to look for him. The stinging in my back intensified. How much blood was on the Proctan's blade, I'd say he cut me almost a full inch deep. And although I knew it wouldn't be fatal, it didn't make it hurt any less. Despite that, I knew I still had the strength to keep fighting, and I almost decided to, till I heard the distant humming and whooshing of something colossal in the distance, and it only became louder by the second. With a pained groan, I turned, and about a mile away, I could spot the shape of a Proctan aircraft heading its way over in my direction. I'd encountered some before, but hadn't yet attempted to take one down. Just fleed from a couple. Well, for starters, these things were about the size of a commercial plane. The size wasn't the thing that made me hesitant about it. First of all, it was made from the same metal as their armored suits and sonic grenades, the blade that I'd been stabbed in the back with, apparently. So that alone would mean I'd have to put my back into destroying it. That wasn't mentioning the cannons that were on it, which were powerful enough to knock the hell out of me, even more so than the regular rifle-sized blasters. And who knows how many Proctan reinforcements they had inside that thing. There were several of those cannons around the ship. It seemed to have some sort of targeting system. They were pretty accurate, locking onto me even when I'd already broken the sound barrier. On top of that, the ships could also emit a more powerful variant of the sonic grenades, which had come close to bursting my eardrums in a previous encounter, even with the short amount of time I spent being in the vicinity of its range. That was enough to make my ears bleed. With the pain of my wound slowly increasing, I figured I should bide my time for the moment and retreat before the warship was close enough to initiate an attack. Part of me felt like a coward. I should have stayed there and finished it. But if I did that, and they were able to incapacitate or even kill me, then I'd never get my hands on their leader, commander, well, whoever or whatever the hell it was. With a long exhale, I then turned and flew away, nearly colliding with the roof of an apartment complex as I initially took off. I kept my flight speed low enough to avoid breaking the sound barrier and alerting the Proctans in the ship to my location if they didn't already know. I turned back mid-flight just to make sure I wasn't being pursued. Despite how it sounds, I wasn't flying aimlessly to escape. I had somewhere specifically to go, a sort of safe house, if you will. Well, if you subtract the safe part, anyway. It was simply a 2-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of an ugly grey apartment complex. There were no secret rooms with gadgets and weapons, no massive underground caves with supercomputers. Just an old, weathered and slightly eerie expanse of long, empty rooms and hallways that once bustled with life. A lot of that life was my now deceased brother, Sean, who had perished when the extermination first started. I wasn't around to save him. He joined the list of billions who became the victims of Proctan slaughter. When arriving and making sure to land softly on the balcony, I listened out just to make sure that I'd put enough distance between myself and those Proctans that it wouldn't be a problem for the time being. But once sure of myself, I stepped inside and headed straight for the bathroom. Now, for the sake of reference, the suit I wore was nearly as durable as me. It was designed and manufactured by someone in the branch I was contracted with. They had experience making suits for various enhanced people, a couple of whom I worked and fought alongside. Those were the good times, finishing the mission and stopping the bad guys, before going out for coffee together afterward like we were just a bunch of co-workers at a business office. My suit's colouring consisted of mostly dark, almost lead grey, with a few thin accent lines of obsidian black that circled around the elbows, knees, and the very end of the sleeves, along with a few jagged, almost lightning bolt-esque lines that ran across my chest area, parallel to each other. But, of course, that had been a bit obscured due to all the Proctan blood on me. Some of it had come off during my flight to get here, but a portion of it had already begun to dry and stain the material. It was just a simple 2-piece top and bottom. There was nothing like a cape, utility belt, or high-tech accessories, Most of that stuff will only hold you back in the long run, in all honesty. I wasn't sure how or where my administration got their hands on the material for this thing. Hell, I don't even know what it is. Wherever they hid the classified paperwork for it is probably nothing more than a smouldering crater by now. I turned and let my back face the bathroom mirror, and instantly frowned once I saw the stained trail of my own blood that ran down my back and right thigh, stopping just at the back of my knee. I lifted the upper piece of my suit to get a better look at the wound, my hand still half covered in Proctan blood. The cut had already begun to close up. Still, there was a bit of dry blood that sat around it. It wasn't more than half an inch in vertical length, and would very likely be completely gone within the next couple of days, not even a scar. After examining the wound and washing up a bit, I headed back into the living area of the apartment and sat on the couch, a feeling of defeat washing over me. There I was, sitting down after the world had ended, and despite all that I'd been given, I felt just powerless, as if every effort I made was in vain. Ultimately, no matter what I did, it wouldn't bring everyone back. This wasn't how things were supposed to turn out. In every superhero movie ever, the protagonist punches the bad guy, saves the day, maybe loses a side character here and there at most. Sure, one might say it's not completely my fault, and from a purely logical and rational standpoint, I agree. But human beings are not, never have been, or never will be purely logical creatures. Never. Look, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it gets harder and harder every day to find ways to convince myself that I truly did everything that I could do, that I only lost because the odds were stacked so high against me that it was only a matter of time, well, a matter of fate. I fly over these streets every day, and I've seen bones far too small to belong to an adult more often than I ever wanted to. I've witnessed the remains of those who died in the arms of their loved ones. Those were just the ones that were left somewhat intact. Within hours of them first invading, they racked up a body count in the millions. And from what I understand, the reason for their extermination has something to do with resource and population scarcity in their homeworld, and Earth was the closest neighboring planet capable of supporting life. We were barely obstacles to them. Took us out like it was some household chore. The only reason we lasted as long as we did is because we threw every enhanced person we knew of at them. Regardless, I caught myself staring at the ceiling. My eyes drifted down to the old TV stand sitting parallel to the couch. On the top of that stand was a picture of my brother Sean. Well, me and him the day we'd finished moving into the apartment. It was a couple of years before I'd undergone any experimentation, so it was an exhausting venture. Still shocked to this day we had the energy to even take that picture. Admittedly, it was a nice, quiet moment of reminiscing. I had to think about all the dumb stuff that we did as kids and got away with. My childhood was relatively pretty normal, and it was made all the better by having him around. It was a nice, quiet moment, up until I heard a sudden whooshing sound coming from outside my apartment balcony, as if a large projectile had quickly passed by it. Immediately my blood began to boil, and I thought that the Proctans might have ended up following me back. I got up and threw myself forward, flying right out of the glass door gap and above the balcony. I stopped several feet away from the balcony's safety rail and continued to hover there, listening out for the source of the whooshing noise. I didn't immediately catch sight or hear anything. Whatever it was had either gone or was simply no longer in motion. But once I focused in and caught the faint sound of a constant thumping, I was inclined to believe the latter. It originated from somewhere above me, and I'd heard enough heartbeats in my time to recognize what it was. After peering up, I did a double take upon seeing a woman hovering above me. Aside from the eyes that glowed a bright lapis color, and her levitating even higher than me, she appeared human. But all of that was without mentioning the fact that her torso was covered in what looked to be fresh Proctan blood. It slowly dripped off, nearly hitting me on the top of my head. While I was happy to have encountered not only another enhanced survivor, but one who seemed to be just as happy to take these bastards down as I was, there was just one thing that made me more than a bit hesitant to welcome her presence. Her attire was a tight-fitted white suit, similar to mine beside the collar. Although most of that color had been distorted by the blood, in the top upper left side of the chest area were 5 numbers along with a capital P at the beginning of the digits. Her suit was a jumpsuit, a super jumpsuit if you will, and the line of numbers was her prisoner ID number. She was an inmate at a federal prison for the enhanced, and the particular prison that suit had come from housed enhanced who'd committed some truly atrocious acts. Well, for context, you'd have to have a body count of at least 10 before they consider putting you in there just for murder. Her stare intensified. I tried to contemplate how I should react. After all, I only knew she could fly. I wasn't familiar with her particular power set. Perhaps she could open black holes at will, or could control living flesh and would telekinetically tear my skin from my bones if I had a wrong or threatening move to make. The last thing I needed to do was provoke her before I knew what I was dealing with. Although it seemed my idling was beginning to irritate her, and her expression shifted into that of disappointment, I suppose. It was honestly hard to tell. Part of me was taken aback when she chuckled weakly. "It's rubble, isn't it?" she asked in a way I concluded to be rhetorical. "You remember me?" Her voice was soft but also paradoxically hoarse. Can't say that I do," I replied, feeling myself tense up a bit. "Of course you don't, but it doesn't matter, because soon enough you will, even after you're nothing but a pile of smoldering ash." Then, in one swift motion that was fast enough to catch even me off guard, she raised her right hand and it began to glow a bright blue lapis hue, the same shade as her eyes. The pulsating color then spread its way up the length of her arm, looking as if someone had just activated a glow stick. The first of my kind that I'd seen in months, and they were already trying to kill me. Figures. Part 2. "Whoa, wait, just a sec," I attempted to blurt before being cut off by the blue beam of energy that had manifested from her arm and blasted me in the chest. I went crashing through both the balcony and the apartment itself, all the way through the other side of the building. I was able to bring myself to a somewhat chaotic halt at about the same altitude. I could hear the woman begin to fly toward me, right through the destroyed section of the building. And while yes, she was heading straight for me, I caught a glimpse of something that drew my attention away despite that fact. In the middle of the living room, where a lot of the furniture had either been knocked around or charred up from the heat of her blasts, sat the now shattered and torn picture of me and my brother Sean, which had been thrown from the table in all the chaos of my body speeding through the expanse like a rogue missile after the woman's attack. Immediately, I felt my blood boil, and my more cautious approach toward the situation went out of the window. The last living memory of my brother that I had left, destroyed, all because some nobody had some sort of one-sided petty grudge with me. The woman blasted me with another of her beams, and this one seemed to be even more powerful than the previous one because even after putting both of my arms up to block the projectile, I was still sent backward hundreds of feet, my body flipping and flailing until I brought myself to another stop. I was too angry to fully register that a few drops of blood had begun descending from my nose. The woman held both her arms out as she flew toward me, and they both began to light up once again. But this time I was ready. Before she even fired off her blasts, I ascended high above the projectile's direct path and wasted no time flying right back down toward her at a speed she wasn't prepared to counter. We collided, and I hit her hard enough with my body to send her crashing toward the ground like a human bullet. Her impact threw an empty pickup truck off the ground and dislodged chunks of concrete from the sidewalk. She slid across it for dozens of feet. It took her several seconds to come to a stop. She was groaning in pain as she got back onto her feet to take flight again. The fact that she'd survived a blow like that meant her body's durability was likely up there with mine. But that wasn't the main thing on my mind. I made a mad dash back over to the apartment complex and flew right into the opening that had been created at the start of our conflict. I stopped and descended before kneeling right over the decimated remains of the picture. The section that depicted Sean himself was torn beyond repair. I held my breath as I attempted to pick up some of the pieces, pointlessly trying to put them together in a way that would reform the image the way it previously was. But it was no use. A drop of blood fell from my nose and landed on the torn pieces, staining them red as they sat in my hand. I gritted my teeth and squeezed my hands together. I hadn't even heard the woman fly back up. Only her heartbeat as she landed several feet away in the path of rubble that we'd created. I looked over, and we both locked eyes. Her previous expression of confidence had faded into one of hesitance. Everything seemed to fall silent around us, and I felt my blood boil. I stood up before throwing my arms back. "Who the hell are you? What do you want from me?" I snarled, my hands now balling into fists after I dropped the torn pieces of the picture. Her expression now seemed to manifest guilt, but she didn't give a verbal response of any kind. Not at first. Instead, she began to walk forward toward me, and I readied myself for yet another attack from her. "What did I ever do to you?" I continued with a tone of disdain. She then suddenly stopped. Only a few feet of distance sat between the two of us. "Back on March 12th, the day we first made contact with the Proctans," she began, taking a less threatening tone than previously. "I was a member of the Enhanced Forces, just like you. We were deployed to help the military neutralize some of the ones that had attacked the East Coast. I was sent with a team of 3 others, one of them being Moulton. You met him and me in the briefing before the fighting started. Yeah, he was a fan of yours. He was also my dad. You shook hands with him, told him you liked his suit. It meant the world to him. But of course he refused to admit it out loud." My eyes widened and the memory of just what she had described began to re-emerge in the forefront of my mind. Her father, Moulton, was a newly contracted hero who possessed an immunity to extremely high temperatures and was able to generate and disperse liquid magma at will. I wasn't sure how he'd come into having such abilities. I wasn't at a high enough level of clearance to find out. But nonetheless, despite him being about a decade older than myself, I still had several years of seniority over him when it came to the Enhanced Special Forces. From what I was told by my superiors, he'd been following my work as rubble, and, like the woman said, was a fan of mine. Although I didn't see him that way. More or less, he was just a fellow co-worker. "Wait, you're Moulton's daughter, Sindris?" I asked, softening my tone and taking a less defensive stance. How did I survive the slaughter you left us in the middle of?" she erupted, her eyes beginning to shine brighter than before now. They glowed with the brightness of high-powered flashlights. I now knew the source of her anger, and almost forgot about my own. After the briefing where I'd met her father, we'd all gone out to fight back against the group of invading Proctans along the coast. At that point in time, pretty much no one was aware of the true capabilities and technological advancement of these things, and we treated it like any other invasion, even as they were slaughtering regular people by the thousands around different parts of the globe. Some nations weren't able to get the word out to the rest of the world about what was happening, hence why we didn't know the true danger that we were all in. And it would cost us, all of us, something. If it wasn't our life directly, it'd be a family member, a friend, or their surrounding community. Once Moulton, Sindris, and the rest of the team had already been in the fight for what I remembered as hours, I ended up getting an emergency distress ping from my brother, Sean. You see, Sean worked as an EMT, and handling stressful situations wasn't exactly new to him. He and I were both in agreement at the time that pinging me was only to be done if his or a large number of other lives were in danger, and he didn't have access to the proper resources to deal with it. I knew in my gut that he was in serious trouble, and that I had to make it back to him before something terrible happened. Despite the fact that leaving in the middle of a fight would get me reprimanded, I didn't care. I left, confident that the rest of the team would be able to hold their own until I returned. But you see, I never told the team why I left. Perhaps from their perspectives, and more specifically Syndra's, I simply fled without warning. You left us there, all of us. I watched those ugly fucks blow my dad to hell, all because you were a sniveling coward who ran, she shouted, her previous display of rage emerging again. Both her arms now began to glow and pulsate in conjunction with her eyes. You don't understand. I needed to, I began, before she swiftly blasted me with a beam from each arm, ending my sentence long before I could utter another word. I was sent straight out of the building and into the one across the street, smashing right through the mix of glass, rebar, and concrete as if it were made of styrofoam. But it didn't end there. It wasn't until I'd come barreling out the other end at a downward angle and was mere feet away from impacting the street that I caught myself, hovering just above it as if lying flat on an invisible bed. I felt a small but warm stream of blood flow its way down my chin and neck. Putting my fingers to my lips confirmed that that was the source of it. It was only a matter of seconds before she was in my line of sight again, hovering some dozens of feet above me. She attempted to blast me yet again, but I evaded by maneuvering to the side before she was able to release her beam. While she definitely wasn't as fast, she gave chase to me as I took off flying through the streets, weaving between the crumbling buildings. Well, I put some distance between the two of us, but not enough to break her line of sight, which allowed her to keep firing off her beams as she flew after me. A couple came close, but I managed to evade them all. Her cries before she fired each one sort of broadcasted when they were going to happen. I came to a sudden stop when we got to the end of a particular road that led into an intersection. I dived down before quickly grabbing a red, empty pickup truck and throwing it at her as a distraction. Despite the dozen or so yards of distance between us, the truck came barreling at a speed she was barely able to react to, and only had milliseconds to aim and fire a beam from her left arm, one which cut the truck clean in half, leaving jagged scorch marks where the bisection had taken place. I then flew at her with my right arm pulled back, and struck her square in the chin with an explosive right hook, one that both drew blood and also sent her crashing into a nearby traffic light pole. Her body bent the metal on impact, causing her to wince and grit her teeth. I barreled toward her while still in flight, and the both of us punctured right through the pole, and as we slid along the sidewalk below, tearing a path into it, I came down with several more blows to her face, each one forcing the ground to shake and rumble beneath her. But I slipped up, and she caught me off guard with a rapid combination of punches, each one charged up by her energy beams. After about 5 hits, she simply threw her right hand out, spread her fingers, and then blasted me in the ribcage with a beam. I spun like a spiraling football before crashing in through the front doors of an old restaurant. I split 3 different tables in half after I slammed through them, and only came to a stop once I crashed through the wall that separated the dining area from the bathroom, my head colliding with the bottom of the toilet and causing it to crack and nearly crumble. I was already back on my feet when she flew in through the newly formed entrance to the building. Her arms began to glow again as she bared her blood-stained teeth at me with a look of resentment. I stared her down with a mix of frustration and hesitance. The latter was due to the fact she hadn't let me tell her what it was I tried to say before we'd broken out into this pointless scrap. "Stop," I snarled, using my arm to wipe fresh blood from my nose and mouth. "Just listen to me for a goddamn second." "Listen to you for what? So you can justify how you left us behind?" she blurted in response. "But my bro..." I began before cutting myself off. A confused expression emerged on Syndra's face, puzzled as to why I'd suddenly stopped my own sentence. In the distance, I heard the roaring of not just one, but several Proctan warships, even through the walls of the building we were in. It sounded close enough that we could be spotted, should we find ourselves outside where we were much more visible. There were at least 4 separate ships that I could hear, which would be more than enough to take out both her and me if a physical confrontation occurred. Don't go back out there, I told her in a hushed tone. What are you talking about? She asked while tilting her head. Warships. Procton warships. They're close. I can hear them. I don't care, she snarled just as her arms began to pulsate once more. I can work around them after I've taken care of you. Look, if they find us with those things, we're both fucking dead. Do you understand? I snapped. The both of us put together wouldn't be able to stand up to that. You couldn't possibly understand what they took from me, she rebutted somewhat weakly. Hey, they killed my brother, I retorted, catching myself looking at the floor as I said it. They fucking killed him. Took him from me. Just like they took your dad from you. Sindris's eyes widened slightly, and although she didn't completely drop her defensive demeanor, her expression told me she was genuinely shocked upon hearing this revelation. That's why I left the fight. That's why your dad got killed. I began. All in all, I couldn't stop my voice from cracking slightly as I spoke. Sean, my brother, he was in trouble. I went to try and save him, but by the time I got there, the Proctons had already killed him. I got the great opportunity to bury what was left of him. Definitely wasn't much. My dad's been in the ground for a long time now, so yeah, maybe I don't completely understand what happened to you. Don't pretend like you're the only one who lost something. The whole goddamn world did, for Christ's sake. Go outside and count the decayed corpses of the men, women, and children whose graves are the cracked pavement of the streets. They didn't have the powers or abilities to fight back with. Imagine how hopeless and scared they felt. How powerless they felt. Watching their loved ones die, all while knowing there was nothing they could have done. Look, they thought and believed people like you, like me, like your father, were going to save them like we always do. Yet we didn't. We failed them. You and me. How many kids do you think were in their bed waiting for their parents to come home that first day the Proctons got here, huh? How many wives and husbands waited for the love of their life to walk through the front door safe and sound, but they never showed up? How many members of families do you think never got the chance to say sorry for all the petty drama and bullshit they put each other through before they were obliterated into nothingness by a goddamn laser? Look, I'm sorry about your dad, I really am. You're full of shit. You need to get off your high horse thinking that you're somehow the only one who can comprehend what it's like to lose the people you care about. From what I could hear, the warships had begun to approach closer, less than half a mile from where we were. The window of time to get out of the area without being seen or drawing their attention was closing fast. Look, I'm not going to keep wasting time fighting you. The real threat is coming. Now, either you can come with me and help make sure that we make those things pay for what they took from both of us and the rest of the world, or you can take your chances on your own. I'm sorry again for leaving you behind, but I'm not the one who killed your dad. They did. They're the enemy. Sure, even with both of us put together, we'll never kill them all, but we can sure as hell hit them where it hurts before we go down. I then lifted myself off the ground and hovered just inches above it. Sindris and I both exchanged a long and silent glance. Didn't expect her to simply drop her grievances with me and let it all go. But several seconds passed and I could now hear the warships approaching dangerously close to the front of the building. Close enough that I could tell she heard it as well at that point. Without saying another word, I turned and flew out the back window of the building, shattering it without a second thought. I kept low to the ground to avoid being seen, and I couldn't hear Sindris following behind me, which I honestly expected, but I wasn't going to waste any more time being on the receiving end of her vengeful crusade. With my apartment being pretty much destroyed in my fight with her, there wasn't any reason left to stay in Manhattan specifically. Even after all those months of searching, I didn't find the leader of the Proctons there, so I needed to keep looking. There were several small outposts that I passed on my way back out to the city limits, but none of them seemed to have any signs of housing higher-ranking Procton soldiers in them. Hell, there might even be a chance the actual Big Boss himself wasn't on Earth. If that was the case, then perhaps killing his second-in-command would get his attention. Just as I'd told Sindris, I wanted to hit them where it hurts for what they'd done to my home, my people. It wasn't long before I was out of deep Manhattan and had made it to a patch of forest, one that I was sure would only get far larger over time as nature reclaimed all the man-made infrastructure. But that was assuming the Proctans weren't planning to build infrastructure of their own, and the chances of that were slim to none. The trees in the forest stood tall and strong. The surrounding vegetation looked just as healthy. I eventually came upon a sizable pond and descended before sitting on a high-hanging tree branch next to it, looking out over the water. I wiped my sleeve across my mouth and nose. The blood that Sindris had drawn from them in our fight was already dried, and my wounds were well into the healing process, though I'll admit my ribs did feel still a bit sore from her continuous energy blasts. I took a deep breath, put a hand on my side, groaning slightly from the sharp pain. Speaking of which, I thought about what she said, how she felt. She was angry, and whether or not it was completely rational wasn't the main point, because I understood it. Humans, even superhumans, were never completely rational creatures. No matter how hard we try to think and act according to cold logic, it'll never be enough to cut out things like anger, jealousy, greed, and despair. Her rage was the same rage I felt, and still feel towards the Proctans. If I'd stayed in that battle, there was no guarantee whether or not her dad would have survived, but there was a chance, and she likely felt as if I'd ripped that chance away from her. So to some degree, her anger at me is understandable as well, even if it was misdirected. Yes, I should have articulated it better when we were trying to bash each other's skulls in, but the heat of the moment doesn't exactly make you always think everything over as you should. I realized also that I hadn't found out why she was in prison. I probably never would. Kind of strange that she never changed out of that jumpsuit during those last several months, but I'm sure it wasn't the first thing on her mind. Part of me was scared. Not of her or the Proctans themselves, but more of the idea of how truly unforgiving and massive the scale of the universe is. For thousands of years, humanity came about, developed languages, social hierarchies, both created and destroyed civilizations. I mean, yeah, we definitely weren't perfect either. Hell, who knows, if the rumors about the reason for the Proctans' invasion were true, and humanity were the ones in need of resources, and had found a close neighboring planet of creatures with technology much less advanced than them, there's no guarantee we wouldn't have done the same thing. But regardless of their many flaws, they were still my people. I was born, I grew up, and lived my whole life here, and sure, my experience may have been a bit different from the average Joe's, but these powers aren't my life. I don't feel like they define me. I still had family I loved, friends I cared for, hell. Even after I gained the ability to throw an SUV into space, I still obeyed my regular human mother when she asked me to do something. Now, the sun was beginning to set, and it beamed over the tips of the surrounding trees. I figured that the tree I was sitting in was going to be where I'd slept for the night. It might seem strange that with the abilities I've been given, well, I still needed to rest. Sure, it took a hell of a lot more to tire me out than the average man, but even I couldn't escape the inevitability of having to catch some Z's. This isn't something I'd really tested the exact limits of, but I once stayed awake for 6 days straight and not one negative side effect. It was the equivalent of a non-enhanced person being awake for only several hours. Back then when the world was still intact, I usually went to bed even before I started feeling tired. Last thing I needed was to start feeling sleepy while flying, and next thing you know, I accidentally crashed right into a commercial plane, all because I wasn't able to pay attention nearly as well. I wasn't able to accurately count the number of days I'd currently been awake for. It was definitely more than a couple, and that, combined with all the bloody battles with some of the Proctans and my fight with Sindris, I felt like it was a good idea to take some advantage of the quiet. I suddenly awoke that morning to the sound of twigs snapping underneath the branch I was lying on. Soon after that, I heard a somewhat slow, rhythmic thumping, quickly recognizing it as a heartbeat. I peered my head over the side of the branch and couldn't help but crack a smile when I laid eyes on the sight of an adult black bear sniffing around near the bottom of the tree trunk. It raised its snout, taking a few more sniffs before beginning to climb its way up. Well, it wasn't long before the bear's eyes met mine, and we exchanged a long glance. I slowly levitated off of the tree branch and began to float down to the ground as gently as I could, making sure that none of my movements were too sudden or quick. "Hey there, big guy," I greeted with a soft delivery and tone. The bear then backed off of the tree, and all four of its paws made contact with the ground below again. Backed up slightly with a defensive stance and a small snarl, but so far so good. Once I was back on the ground myself, I took a small and very slow step forward, allowing the beast to decide its next move. It backed off further, and I kept still where I was. The bear sniffed a few times rapidly and shook its head slightly. I watched as it pointed its muzzle slightly upward, as if looking at something above the both of us. I turned my head up, scanning the tree and finding a plentiful collection of blackberries along several other larger branches. The bear maintained a defensive stance as it looked between both me and up at the branch where the berries were most plentiful, cautious but determined. "Oh, you're just looking for a meal, huh, big guy?" I asked, once again taking the most inviting tone I could muster. As carefully as I could, I pushed myself off of the ground and into the air. The bear backed up yet again, this time much more significantly. Part of me was sure he was going to run, which would have made sense, but instead he simply watched me while keeping his paws in the dirt, curiously but cautiously. I descended after reaching the berry branch and snapping it off. With it in the grip of my left hand, I landed softly against the ground before proceeding to bend over and lightly place it in front of me. I then took several large steps back, and the bear moved forward at a snail's pace, keeping eyes on me as it approached its meal. He seemed a little suspicious, but soon enough he'd come to realize that I had no intention of causing him harm. While he was still a wild animal, and I'd never recommend any normal person to do this, it was refreshing to see some form of life that didn't immediately activate my flight or fight instinct. So I figured I'd have some fun with it. Continued to put enough distance between me and him that he would be able to eat without feeling disturbed. And once he'd closed the distance between himself and all the berries, carefully sniffing around the branch and poking at it with his front left paw, he began to dig in, picking away at the berries like a person chowing down on a kebab. "Hey, enjoy your meal, big guy," I called out softly, to which he seemed much too occupied to acknowledge. "Maybe I'll see you around." I smiled and turned to begin flying up and above the trees. I shifted my head upward and took off, bursting up through the top of the canopy. But along with the sound of the bear still chowing down on his berry branch, a familiar one emerged, that recognizable rhythmic thumping. I pinpointed the source and swiveled my head around to look right at it. Seems like that super hearing of yours is a bit selective, no?" Cindra's grilled with dry sarcasm as she floated level with me, her various cuts and bruises still in the process of healing. "What are you doing here?" I shot back while crossing my arms. "How did you find me?" "I thought about what you said, and I hated it. Then I slept on it. Turns out you were right. Before you say I told you so, no. What I'm about to say doesn't make us friends. Lord knows our psyches are way too deep up shit creek for that to happen anyway. But," she paused, exhaling. "You were right. We're not each other's enemy. They are. And clearly you want them dead as much as I do. We can't take that many of them on by ourselves. So I figured it would be in both our best interest to put aside our gripes with each other for now." "You're asking for a team-up, aren't you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "We're not calling it that," she began. "I'm sorry about attacking you earlier on. Clearly we've both got stuff to work on." "You more so than me," I remarked. "Don't push it," she replied with a raised brow. "Yeah, I'm sorry too, and again, sorry about your dad," I replied after moving the sarcasm in my voice. "He was a brave man." The first time since meeting her, I saw her face take on a neutral expression, not anger or bitterness. Sure, I didn't expect her to suddenly jump with joy, but it was a start. Then again, I'm not really sure I was all that pleasant either. There's an outpost of theirs set up in a warehouse about 10 miles north of here. Came across it on my way back to Manhattan from the prison. It's heavily guarded. It'll take both of us to get into it, Sindra said. Is that where you think their leader is? No, but I know it's where some survivors might be. I saw them taking people in there after the first week of the extermination. None of them came back out. You didn't try to help them. Why? I had orders to focus on the larger populations and protecting the people closer to the coast. It's not an excuse, I know. I should have told someone, but then everything happened with you and my dad soon after. By the time I was able to get back there, they amped up security heavily. I knew I wouldn't be able to make it out of there alive by myself, much less while also trying to keep dozens of people out of harm's way at the same time. Silence fell between the two of us then. We both avoided eye contact while figuring out what to say next. Sindris and I's short-lived rivalry was seemingly put to rest, or at least on hold for the time being. There were people who needed both my help and hers, and despite how things had transpired up to this point, they were what we needed to focus on. Right, take me to it. We'll do a flyby and scope the place out. Try to come up with some sort of plan. Not just go in there guns blazing and get ourselves killed. Try to keep your distance at first. Fine, but we shouldn't take too much time. If the people they have in there are even still alive, scoping the place out is going to be a waste of time. If they notice us too quickly, then they might simply start killing them if they haven't already. Either way, we can't be too slow or too quick. Right, let's worry about the plan on the way there, Sindris sighed. We're running out of time. Part 3. Sindris and I peeked our heads over the roof of the building that we watched the outpost from. We saw 4 armored Proctons enter the base, each equipped with rifle blasters and sonic grenades. One of their warships was parked outside, set about 50 feet to the right of the warehouse. None of its lights were on, indicating it wasn't currently being occupied. That, and the fact I couldn't hear any engine activity coming from it. Are you able to hear how many of them are in there? Sindris asked while keeping her eyes on the warehouse. Just the 4 that walked in. Since they're right by the entrance, I want to get rid of that warship before we go in there. I can grab it and drop it a few miles off the coast, if you keep them distracted for a couple minutes. Try to draw them away from the warehouse. Then if they call in reinforcements, they'll have to circle back. That'll give us time to get people out of there, I went on. I'll get their attention and keep them focused on me until you get back. Then we can brute force our way into the warehouse if it's needed, Sindris added. Despite the fact that the negative tension between us was still in the process of fading away, I found myself impressed with her strategic thinking. The plan we came up with was much better than what I was expecting. There was still a problem of execution, and making it happen the way we'd imagined. Without wasting any more time, I threw myself over the edge of the roof and began to fly toward the empty warship. I allowed Sindris to pass in front of me and make it over to the warehouse first, her eyes and arms beginning to glow with that now signature blue. She then terminated her flight and simply hovered just several yards in front of the entrance to the warehouse. I passed by just as she yelled out, "Hey, you hideous red bastards, come on out!" It was only seconds before a group of armored Proctons emerged from the entrance with rifle blasters in hand. I counted 6, but that likely wasn't all of them. Almost immediately they began to fire their blasters at Sindris. She returned with her own beams, flying around them sporadically to throw them off as they traded shots. Everything was going according to plan thus far. Those Proctons hadn't noticed me fly by as they continued their back and forth with her. I made it to the warship and flew underneath to grab onto it and lift it off the ground and above my head. As previously mentioned, these things were about the size of a commercial plane, something like a Boeing 747, but were quite a lot heavier due to the alien metal they were made of. I knew that I wouldn't stay undetected for long since I started to ascend with it above my head. But with the distraction Sindris was creating, they wouldn't be able to break away to come after me anyway. I pushed off the ground, and the concrete cracked beneath my feet as I began my ascent. I kept my hands flat on the bottom of the warship as I flew up, making sure I was supporting it enough to avoid it tipping one way or the other. The weight itself wasn't the problem, but rather the odd shape. I didn't stop ascending until I was somewhere around 1,000 feet off the ground. Luckily, the particular area we were in was mostly populated with buildings that barely exceeded 40, so I wouldn't have any obstacles obstructing my path. I then took off toward the coast just a few miles away, took a glance down as I flew past the beach. The warship cast a large shadow over the sand, and the various pieces of bones and other human remains scattered around it, including a few empty and half-melted military vehicles. Once I was a decent distance away from land, I began to descend and bring the warship down with me. I didn't want to immediately drop the ship and have it potentially crush or kill sea creatures who were caught off guard. I intended to clear a path and have it fall to the sea floor without that occurring. Breathing underwater wasn't a power I possessed, but being able to hold my breath for a long time was, and the pressure wouldn't be an issue either. I inhaled just as I broke the surface with the warship. I gazed down into the endless blue depths below, looking out and listening for any marine creatures in my direct path. Nothing but the call of a whale made itself known, but it wasn't close enough to my location to be a problem. I concluded that the sound of the ship entering the water scared off most creatures, but I nonetheless still guided it down to the bare sea floor. It kicked up sound all around it once impacting, and over time it would likely become a massive artificial reef. Win-win in my book. After I was sure the warship was sitting stable, I turned, looked up toward the surface of the water several hundred feet above me, and then took flight. And in mere seconds, I'd broken back up through the surface of the water, completely drenched. I then took off with haste back toward the land and back toward the area of the warehouse. A sonic boom erupted as I surpassed the sound barrier and then some to get there without wasting any more time. Everything I passed by was a blur, even to me. Once I made it back, I caught the sight of Sindris in the midst of her scrap with the Proctan soldiers, and so far things seemed to be going in her favor. 2 of them were already dead, indicated by their charred, bisected corpses that were spread across the ground. She hit one directly in the chest area with a beam from her right arm. The Proctan violently rolled down the street upon impact, dropping his blaster in the process. A bit of a struggle took place as he attempted to recover and pushed himself back up off the ground, revealing that the chest piece of his armor had orange burn marks in the shape of Sindris's beam. While she hadn't completely melted through, her beam's heat generated enough to severely weaken the armor with just the first blast. I took full advantage of the opportunity. I flew down at the Proctan just as he'd stood back up and grabbed a hold of his sonic grenade. He held it up, preparing to activate it, while she continued to battle his comrades. But I denied his chance of doing so by making a fist with my right hand and driving both it and most of my forearm through the weakened metal and his chest. He looked at me in complete shock, caught off guard by my sudden appearance. He choked and gagged, expelling some of that violet-colored blood from his mouth as he stayed there helpless while impaled on my arm. I lifted him slightly off the ground and pulled him toward me, my face just inches from the front one through that transparent helmet, all of his eyes going wide upon me, forcing him closer. It's like you guys always say, I began, my eyes narrowing and nose crinkling as I felt that familiar sense of rage boiling its way back up to the surface. Only the strong survive in this universe. And with that, I forced my hand to the left, grabbed a hold of his heart, and crushed it in my palm before simply retracting my arm from his chest and throwing his limp corpse to the side. I'll kill every single one of you, Sindris shouted as she flew up and continued to fire her beams at the attackers. She hovered several yards above and stuck out her arm to take aim. One of the 3 remaining Proctans had gotten a lucky shot off with the blaster and, subsequently, a direct hit on her. She was sent tumbling almost out of sight. I flew up at the group quickly enough to avoid being shot and followed up with a counterattack. I started by grabbing a hold of one of the legs of the closest one, then began to swing around, a rapid 360-degree spin, like a parent spinning their kid for fun. His body worked like a horizontal battering ram, and the other 2 Proctans standing in unison to him were sent flying in their respective directions. One was sent soaring before he crashed onto the left side wall of the warehouse, while the other one went tumbling down the street and slammed through multiple abandoned vehicles. It was several seconds before he came to any sort of stop. As for the one currently in my hands, I simply stopped spinning him, but maintained my grip on his leg before hoisting him up over my head, then quickly slanging him down into the concrete below, a move which I repeated several times. By the time I stopped, the silhouette of his body had created multiple indents within it. All the rattling around seemed to really shake him up. He began to cough and choke. He laid there and we both made eye contact as I brought my foot down on his chest, sinking him further into the cement and sending cracks through it that threatened to rupture far more of it than was already damaged. He attempted to use his appendages to push my leg back up, but it was no use. "You will, your kind, will never understand," he spoke in a weak, whispery tone. "Never understand that you were never meant." I didn't allow him to finish his sentence before I reached down, grabbed onto his helmet, then threw him up into orbit with an angry groan. I then turned my attention to the one whom I'd catapulted down the street. He'd gone to his feet and shoved a black, beaten-down sedan out of the way, the tires screeching as it slid along the asphalt. I stepped forward to begin flying toward him, but Sindris suddenly dropped down to the ground next to him, directly facing the side of his body. She then suddenly lunged forward and placed one hand on his back and the other on his chest, and her arms, both her arms, began to glow, and her eyes brightened as well. And with a forceful, explosive shriek, she then shot out a beam from each arm, and the Proctan's expression of utter terror was frozen in place as she blasted a hole through his body that was so large that a full-grown adult could dive through it. The combined heat and energy of both beams put together was enough to melt right through the armor, and by extension him completely. He dropped to the ground with a pathetic thud, and I looked at Sindris with a raised brow. "Not bad," I told her, to which she seemed somewhat taken aback, and I was anticipating her response before I heard the sudden but subtle sound of a light whoosh, as if something small had been traveling fast in our vicinity. I quickly snapped my head to the right and laid eyes on one of the Proctan's sonic grenades lying on the ground several yards away. I quickly took off to get to it before it went off. The grenade activated before I reached it, and I was immediately blasted with the ear-shattering boom that it dispersed. I felt my head vibrate and rattle as I cut my ears and gritted my teeth. I dropped to my knees and cut my hands over my ears, but it did little to hold the agony. I looked over at Sindris, and despite her not sharing my hearing ability, she too was in great pain from the looks of it, cupping her hands over her ears and squeezing her eyes shut. I pushed past the pain as best I could, and leaped over toward the grenade with my hand still over my ears. It drowned out every other sound around me. Just as I prepared myself to take one hand off my ear to throw the thing up into orbit, I was shoved forward in a violent sliding faceplant right into the cement. I felt something hard strike my back as I went down, and my hands momentarily came off my ears, increasing the intensity of the rattling on my eardrums. I turned, finding yet another armored Proctan behind me. He raised the blaster he held in his hands and looked down at me with a face void of any expression. He said something I wasn't able to pick up due to the grenade, but if I had to guess, it was likely about me being a pathetic human or something. I tried to pick myself up and lunge at him despite the circumstances, but he simply fired the blaster. When the laser struck my chest, I was blasted underground and quickly buried under several feet of concrete and dirt. This, however, worked in my favor, as all of the rubble and debris on top of me helped to keep me protected from most of the sound of the grenade. But even while underground, I was still able to pinpoint almost exactly where it was. It still caused me some pain, sure, but not nearly as much as the direct exposure on the surface. I ended up flying and digging my way through the earth around me, using my body as a sort of makeshift mining drill before positioning myself right underneath where I knew the grenade was lying on the ground above. I stuck my arm up, shoving it into a patch of dirt before spreading my fingers and lining my palm up with the grenade's exact position. After which, I then launched myself upward, blasting right through the earth and concrete and emerging from below with an explosive display back into the bright light of the sun. The moment I felt the grenade hit my palm, I pulled my arm back and threw it up with everything I had. It quickly vanished into the blue ocean of sky above us, and the piercing sound waves terrorized us no longer. Sindris had gotten back to her feet, both of her ears leaking thin streams of blood. I planted my feet back on the ground before then reaching around the side of my head and pressing my index and middle to the area of my chin just below my ear. That familiar wet and warm sensation of fresh blood was there, and pulling my hand back and seeing the red on my fingers confirmed it. "We have warships on the way," growled a Proctan, who stood next to his comrade with both of their blasters in hand. "You'll both last only moments against them." I clenched my fist, feeling my response rising in my throat, only for Sindris to take the words right out of my mouth. "Let them come," she hissed. "They can collect your corpses when they get here." She and I then turned our heads to face one another, sharing a look of mutual understanding. As soon as they prepared to fire their weapons, Sindris swiftly struck her arms out and blasted them each with a separate beam, melting their rifles in the process and sending them barreling down toward the road, flailing and kicking as they tried to grab onto something. I took flight after the one on the left, while Sindris pursued the one on the right. And as soon as I reached him, I unleashed a fury of left and right hooks onto his helmet while he was still in motion, smashing the road into pieces below us as I allowed his momentum to continue while still delivering blows. We both came to a hard stop when I wrapped my hand around his throat and then threw him up toward the clouds, not nearly hard enough to get him into orbit, but still enough to surpass the height of the skyscrapers far off in the distance. I allowed a few short moments to pass before I flew up after him, and when I did, a sonic boom erupted only a second before I reached him. That sonic boom was nothing in comparison to the sound of both my left, right, and fist colliding with his armor as I repeatedly punched him higher and higher into the sky. "What's the matter?" I shouted with a rage unlike any before, delivering a forceful uppercut that increased his altitude by at least another quarter mile. I flew up, not wanting him to get the chance to begin falling back down toward the ground below us. "You seem a little quiet," I snapped, before repeating the process with another uppercut and flying up to him, the both of us now coming close to reaching low cloud level. "Go on, tell me how weak we are, how we never were meant to thrive. All I hear about is how we were never fit to live in this universe. So go on, educate me." I exploded up with yet another blow to his chin. When I closed the distance after flying up this time, I simply grabbed him by the throat and held him firm, letting the both of us simply hover those thousands of feet in the air. He looked at me through his cracked helmet, not attempting to escape from my grasp. All the rattling around in his suit had seemingly gotten to him, further confirmed by the fact that he coughed up some sort of beige-colored equivalent to bile, painting the front and back of his helmet with it as he ejected out of both mouths. He began weakly. You cannot win." "I know," I rebutted, "but when that day comes, you won't be one of the ones who gets to see me lose." And with that, I pulled my free arm back and struck him square in the face, but holding back just enough so as to not fully break his helmet. Once he was inevitably sent flying forward while still in the air, I flew in the same direction, surpassing him and putting myself right in his path of trajectory. While he was still en route directly to me, I took both of my hands, put them together, interlocked my fingers, before then raising them both above my head and slamming them down on his back as soon as he reached me. And down he went toward the ground, moving at a speed so high that his body began to engulf in flames due to the atmospheric compression. I waited a couple of seconds before beginning to fly down after him at bullet speed, the sonic boom occurring almost instantly. The flaming Proctank swiftly came closer into view as he plunged closer and closer toward the pavement, but he wouldn't collide with it, not while still alive anyway. Just as he came within 100 feet of impact, I sped up, and with everything I had, I flew directly through his torso area, violently bisecting him and drenching myself in his blood. His two halves continued to fall and embedded themselves in the cement below, releasing an ear-shattering sound of collision upon impact. Dust dispersed all around like a thick fog. I slowed my descent and landed on both feet, but even with my effort to suddenly put the brakes on, I still smashed the pavement with my landing. I gazed toward the warehouse, and then back at Sindris, who stood with fresh violet blood on herself, same as me. "Come on. We've got to get in there and get those people out before the warships get here," I said while waving. We then both ascended over to the warehouse entrance, which was mostly walled off by some sort of strange material that resembled marble in appearance. But luckily, there was an opening that acted as a door, allowing both Sindris and I to slip inside. Upon entering, we were genuinely surprised when it appeared that not much was different from what you'd expect from a normal warehouse, with the exception of a few long silver wires running along the floor that were connected to a few black rectangular objects that resembled oversized computer towers. All three were well over 6 feet tall and almost 2 feet in width. 3 thin vertical lights ran down the side facing us on each one. They were rather dim, but still bright enough to be noticed. The wall in which I had caused the Proctan to collide into earlier allowed some extra light to flood inside. "Must be some sort of energy unit," Sindris voiced as she continued to glance around the expanse. Something like that. Let me know if you spot anything," I replied. We both then flew up toward the ceiling in order to get a better view of the interior, trying to spot any sort of oddities that would clue us in as to these people's fates. Maybe they moved them somewhere else," I suggested, lifting up a dusty stack of shipping pallets in order to look underneath them. Sindris then suddenly froze in midair, catching my attention. "What's wrong?" I asked. "You, might just be right," she announced, just before pointing to a particular corner in the interior. I turned my attention to the same area she'd pointed to. We both laid eyes on what looked to be some sort of circular opening in the floor, about the circumference of 2 semi-truck tires, with a strange silver railing almost completely surrounding it, save for a 3-foot wide gap. The opening appeared dark, with no light emitting from it. It honestly wasn't even noticeable without the shine of the railing. We both flew in its direction without saying a word, and landed just in front of the gap in the railing. I peered over the opening after taking a step forward, and down below came a dim, white glow of light. I did a double take once that light suddenly started becoming brighter and brighter, like its source was moving directly towards us. We both immediately adopted defensive stances, waiting for some sort of ambush or attack. Eventually, the intensity of the light's brightness seemed to reach its peak, and I took a couple of steps back, preparing for the worst. But nothing came. Nothing except the rumbling sound of metal and rock colliding with one another. But once our eyes had adjusted, Sindris and I were met with the sight of some sort of oval-shaped platform. The outer circumference edge was lined with a shiny silver metallic material, while the rest of it was made up of a strange, diamond-shaped chunk of something that resembled marble, similar to the material that walled off the front of the warehouse. "I don't trust the fact that it came up on its own without us setting anything off," Sindris voiced. "Yeah, it's got trap written all over it. Only one way to really find out," I rebutted. We both then stepped onto the odd, futuristic-looking platform. The white chunks below then began to pulsate rapidly for several seconds, as if there was some sort of switch that controlled their brightness levels being flipped on and off in a repetitive fashion. A moment or two passed, and the platform started to descend back down at the same rate it had ascended. I picked up the sound of several different rhythmic thumpings, heartbeats. I felt an immediate sense of hope. Perhaps these people were still alive after all. "Hey, I can hear them," I said softly, to which Sindris responded with something adjacent to a smile. Not quite all the way there, but it was definitely closer than anything I'd seen before. Not that I'd been doing much better myself. The idea that very soon I'd get to see more living human beings made me feel a way I thought wasn't possible anymore ever since the extermination. Eventually, the black rock walls around us disappeared, and the platform came to a stop. A bright, almost blinding light suddenly drenched the area, and it took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust. I brought my hand down to my face, and was greeted with the sight of a large, white rectangular room. It had that same sterile appearance as a doctor's office. Both the left and right walls were lined with all sorts of strange equipment, some of which included the towers and connected wires we'd seen above ground. Toward the very end of the room, which had to be somewhere between 30 to 40 feet, stood an unarmored Proctan, with the side of his body facing us, not allowing his front or back face to detect Sindris and me. I could hear both his heartbeat and another, both within a few feet of each other. In one of the appendages hanging at his sides, he held what looked to be a small blade, and unlike the one that had been used to stab me earlier on, this one appeared much smaller and even sharper, almost like that of a surgical blade. Sindris and I didn't attack immediately or make our presence known, not yet. As another Proctan, also unarmored, entered the room from what looked to be a corridor on the right down at the end, not far from where the first Proctan had been standing. In one of his appendages, he held what looked to be some sort of high-tech tablet. I guess iPads weren't exclusive to Earth. "The rest must be prepped for examination," hissed the one holding the blade. "Subject 1 still hasn't awoken, and the rest still need to be converted. The cryo chambers down here are nearly full. We don't have space left. The others must be prepped elsewhere," responded the one with the tablet. "We need to transport the rest then. The humans will be down here soon. The warships may not get here before they find us." "Huh, you got that right," I shouted out, prompting both the Proctans to turn their heads our way, both of their facial expressions devolving into nervous uncertainty. "Oh, no, we need more time," the Proctan with the blade erupted before the both of them turned to run down the open corridor to the right. Before either of them could make it to the threshold, Sindris raised her right arm and fired off a beam right in front of the entrance, stopping the both of them dead in their tracks. I then flew forward and had the Proctan with the knife's throat in my left hand in less than a second. With my right, I reached down and snatched the knife right from the grip of his appendage and let it fall to the floor. The one with the tablet simply stayed put, mainly because Sindris had her arm aimed right at him. One wrong move and he would be nothing but a smouldering pile of ash. "Where are the people you brought down here? I'm going to give you a few seconds to answer, and if we like what you say, we'll allow you to both die quickly." While still within my grasp, he attempted to turn his head to the right, well, my right and his left, down the corridor. So I allowed my eyes to follow where he was glancing, and what I saw will be forever burned within my mind. The corridor was long. I could only see that it led to some other white expanse similar to the room we found ourselves in. The width was several feet, and each side wall was completely transparent. I assumed the material to be glass, but it didn't really matter, because either way, I would have seen the horrors inside. Contained behind the glass on each side of the walls were people, or rather corpses. I couldn't detect any heartbeats coming from them. They were all in a state of undress and hooked up to wiring protruding from their abdomens, shoulders, and thighs. Men, women, and even some children. There was a faint frost on the glass, indicating they'd been keeping the dozens of bodies cold in order to preserve them for their twisted means. Sindris, who had stayed further back down the room and wasn't at an angle to see what it was I was witnessing, took notice of my sudden silence and bewildered expression. "Rebel, what is it?" she asked as she stepped forward, keeping her arm pointed at the other Proctan, as if he were at gunpoint. I didn't respond verbally. I couldn't. I was surprised that her question even registered at all. It was as if the world around me had paused, as I stood there taking in what I'd just seen. Of all the abominations I had defeated, monsters I killed, that sight was the most horrific to me. Nothing in my previous work could ever come close. It seemed that after all, we were too late to save these people. Sindris turned her head to get a glimpse of what was in the corridor, and she immediately put her free hand in front of her mouth as her eyes widened. No words left her lips, not even an exhale. Without a second thought, I applied pressure on Procton's throat. My fingers sank right through his flesh and tissue, immediately spilling blood down on my hand and wrist. He had no time to gasp or express his pain as his head and body began to separate. Once his body became fully disconnected from his head, fell and hit the floor, causing the other Proctan to gasp in disgust and terror as I had dropped the severed head of his comrade. He then backed up, raising his appendages in front of himself as if to shield his body. "I'm not a soldier like the ones up there. Please, I have different orders. I just do what I'm instructed. I'm begging you." They begged too, I snarled, before then lunging forward, driving my fist and forearm right through the center of his front face before yanking it back to me, silencing him just before he collapsed. I slowly approached the glass on the left, putting my blood-stained hand on it and weakly raising my head to look at all those inside. There I was, powerless to reverse what had been done to them. I felt tears begin to form in my eyes. I imagined all the pain they must have suffered being nothing but guinea pigs. Whatever terrible experiments or procedures they did on them, I didn't care to know. At the very least, they weren't in pain anymore. That was the only thing that kept me from having a meltdown. I could hear Sindris behind me begin to choke as she held back sobs, specifically while looking at what appeared to be a family inside the glass, a mother, father, and their 2 children. They were elderly there as well. No matter their age, their race, their sex, they were there, stashed behind all the glass like cattle in a meat freezer. "I failed," she said. "I should have come here. I could have saved them. They'd still be alive if I hadn't been a coward." "No, it's not your fault," I interjected, turning around and reaching to put a hand on her shoulder before deciding against it. "They did this." "No, you don't get it," she erupted before turning around. "I let this happen. I saw them bringing them here. I kept going all because I wanted to follow some orders that never even fucking mattered. They're all dead because of me." I paused, shifting my eyes to the right as I struggled to find the words to respond. "We're not gods. We can't be everywhere at once. We couldn't save them, but we can still avenge them. I want to make them all suffer for what they've done. And we will. We damn sure will. I'm not a hero. Never really was. How could I ever call myself one when I let something like this happen?" "Well, we both failed just as much as the other. You and me have an opportunity to make sure this doesn't go unpunished. And we need to take it." Nothing further was said for some time. But as the silence set in, I heard more rhythmic thumpings coming from down the corridor and around the right-hand corner. Assuming that it was more Proctans, I dashed down with a raised fist and a furious demeanor, only to turn the corner and be met with a sight that made me drop both entirely. There was another large room at the end of this hall, but unlike the previous, it took on a shape closer to a sphere than a rectangle. The same sterile white walls were present, but were broken up by sets of thin, red lasers that ran down from the floor and up into the ceiling, creating the appearance of prison cell bars. Spaces behind the bars looked to be no more than 50 square feet, but most were empty, save for one. Behind the laser cell bars was a man somewhere in his early 40s, and unlike those behind the glass inside the corridor, was clothed. The same applied to the other 2 people inside there with him, the first of which was a woman who appeared to be the same age as him, holding a young girl who couldn't have been older than 10. It was instantly clear to me that they were a family. The shared expressions of hopelessness on their faces as they huddled close together said so. They all threw their heads up upon seeing me, and the father's look of utter despair dissipated. You're him, the rubble guy," he stuttered. "You can call me Victor, sir. We're here to get you and your family out of here," I replied, pointing to Sindris, who stood close by. "I thought all the heroes were dead," voiced the woman as she continued to hold the child. "Not all. Some of us are just too tough for those ugly bad guys," Sindris countered with a softer tone, making eye contact with the little girl as she did. The girl and Sindris exchanged a pair of warm smiles. And despite everything we'd just witnessed, she seemed joyful at the sight of this child. "Look, we're going to get you and your mummy and daddy out of here, okay?" she said while stepping forward slowly. The little girl giggled, darting her eyes up at Sindris with a relaxed look. Despite everything she'd lightly witnessed, her joyful child nature hadn't been fully taken away. "I like your eyes. They're pretty," she complimented, to which Sindris let out a delighted chuckle. And without warning, we all heard the sound of a massive thud coming from above. And not far away from where that had originated, I picked up the sound of a mechanical roaring. Although the others didn't react to it, indicating I exclusively sensed that part. Ah, regardless, I know what both of those sounds meant. Sindris did too. She and I shared a glance, knowing that things weren't going to stay so peaceful for very long. Well, my dear friends, that is part 3 there at the end of this 10-part story, and I can't believe it's taken me 6 months to get back to this, so my apologies for that one. I like where this is going. I love how it ends. I've read it, of course, so I know how it goes. So I think you're going to really enjoy the rest of it, and I will be bringing this to you on a much more regular basis from now on, I promise. Okay, well, I will be back again throughout the rest of this year. There's not that long left, there's 10 days left. But I will be maintaining a fairly regular schedule throughout the holidays, and I do so hope you're going to join me. Well, my friends, till the next time, remember this is just a story, and you all sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.